Hey everybody, welcome to the third episode of our weekly mailbag recording something or other where we answer your questions. The idea here is pretty simple, guys. This is just me talking to you, people who follow us on YouTube or read the site at PCPer.com. If you have questions or comments or ideas you want me to talk about, leave them in the comments to this video and we'll go through them and select some for the upcoming weeks. So I want to start here. We'll just jump right into it. We've got a question from Rivo K. He's actually got two here. When will PCPer start doing AM4 or TR4 motherboard reviews, if ever? It seems lacking to me. You pretty much review everything else but no AMD motherboards. Does Mori simply not feel like doing these, or what's the deal? The reason you haven't seen any AM4 specific motherboard reviews yet is just simply a matter of resources and time. Alan's here, he's dedicated at storage. Ken's here, dedicated helping me get through all the stuff I need to do. I'm doing processors, I'm doing GPUs, managing the business side. Mori has a full-time job. He doesn't work for us full-time. And he has a lot of life stuff going on. He's back in school. And so as a result, his time is sometimes limited. And making sure he has access to resources of having the right processors, the right motherboards, etc. is also pretty important. That being said, we do need to do the AM4 reviews, and we definitely need to do the Threadripper TR4 reviews. As you know, all the X29 motherboards definitely had some questionable stuff happen with them, so we want to make sure we're covering all those grounds. So I'm working with AMD to get another Threadripper processor to send to Mori, so that we can do Threadripper reviews, and then the same thing on the AM4. It really just comes down to a matter of bandwidth. How many reviews can he pump out in a week or a month time frame versus how many motherboards actually come out. You know, remember when AM4 launched, a ton of motherboards come out. We're going to see the same thing with TR4. So we'll try to cover what we can in the CPU kind of platform story that we do, and then we'll depend on a lot of other people in the community until we get those guys ramped up. He had a second question as well. Is there a difference playing a game at 60 FPS on a 60 Hz monitor versus 60 FPS on a 144 Hz monitor? Do you really need over 100 FPS to truly take advantage of a high refresh rate monitor like everyone seems to be saying? So that's actually interesting. There is definitely a difference playing a game at 60 FPS on a 60 Hz display or 144 Hz display. For one thing, depending on your VSync state or if you're using G-Sync or FreeSync, things shift a lot. If you're running 60 frames per second on a 144 Hz display and you have VSync off, then you'll see screen tearing. Now, because it is a high refresh rate display, the amount of tearing you see will be minimal, and it will be on and off the screen pretty quick, but you'll see tearing for sure. If you're playing at 60 frames per second on a 60 Hz panel with VSync off, in theory, you would see nothing. It would be a perfectly smooth animation. But the truth is, you're never actually playing just at 60 FPS unless you have VSync on. So when you're playing at VSync on in those two states, VSync on at 60 Hz and 68 frames per second would be smooth, no tearing. But if you're playing at 60 frames per second on that 144 Hz high refresh monitor and you have VSync on, you're going to have some stutter and judder as the frames go in and out of these different states, right? Because it's got to render at some multiple subdivisor of 144 Hz. So there is definitely a difference there. If you have a high refresh rate monitor, it makes sense you will want to run at high refresh rates. You don't have to, and if you're okay with screen tearing, and like I said, the screen tearing will be somewhat minimal because of the frequent refreshes on the display, then you can run, you know, if you've got 144 Hz, 2560 by 1440 panel, but you want to play GTA 5 or The Witcher 3 at settings that you think look best and it's running at 60 or 70 frames per second, then you know what, you can do that. That's fine. There's no inherent difference, but I do think you'll have a better experience if you're closer to that maximum refresh rate, and obviously even better if you're in a variable refresh monitor like a G-Sync or a FreeSync, but you know they're a little bit more expensive, and there are fewer of them to choose from, for sure. Now Please Not asks, how about time codes with the questions in this video description? Makes it much nicer and increases my likelihood to view the video knowing there's a question or three that I want to hear answered before starting to view it. We can probably do that. I think the idea was to make these videos short enough, you know, in the 10 to 20 minute mark, although I definitely went over that last week, that you didn't have to worry about how long it was going to take, and that you just watch the whole thing anyway, because you never know when I'm going to say something stupid or intelligent or, you know, interesting, I guess. We'll see about putting some time codes in there. I do put in the description kind of a handful of the questions we answered, just so you have an idea of some of the more interesting topics that may be covered. But we'll see. Now we're editing these videos that we weren't before, so maybe we'll find out how that goes. Ryan McFarlane asks, will you be doing an unboxing and teardown of the Xbox One X? Yeah, I mean, probably. Depends on our ability to pre-order 2 of them, because I'm going to have one for me that I know will be functional at the end of the night, and one that we can go pick up at a midnight release somewhere and maybe do that. Those were people who don't know maybe what Ryan is referencing. We did this for the original Wii when it came out. We happened to go out, bought 2 of them. I had only pre-ordered one, but somebody said, hey, somebody I knew at Best Buy said, hey, we've got an extra one if you wanted to get a different one. So we did, and we basically had my friend Matt playing the new Mario game on the Wii on one side of the live stream, while we Ken and I disassembled the Wii on a table in the mainframe, right? So we did some interesting stuff. That we also did a Xbox One teardown and a PlayStation 4 teardown. Those were interesting as well. Didn't really do one for the Xbox One S, although mostly that was because sites like iFixit and whatnot had disassembled the whole thing before we ever got our hands on ours, right? So they got access to one early through whatever means, and were able to do the same thing. So if that happens again, it may dissuade me from doing a teardown of the Xbox One X to destroy a piece of hardware, maybe, even though we already know exactly what the inside of it looks like, and the people who do it incredibly well have already taken care of it. We'll see. Antonio Cunningham asks, how long should you use a CPU before you upgrade, and the same for a GPU? That's a tough question to answer. It's really 2 things, right? It's based on what your budget constraints are and what your tolerance for performance degradation is, right? I know many people who have stayed with Nehalem processors for a long time, people who are still on Sandy Bridge processors, and it achieves all of the things they want to achieve. So what's the point of upgrading, right? Unless you know you want new features, you're just an enthusiast and you like to play with the new toys. There's a lot of reasonable answers to stick with the performance and specific CPU that you have already. In terms of a GPU, that's maybe a little bit more straightforward. As you keep the GPU until the games you want to play aren't running anymore, right? Or they're not running at the performance you want to. Or maybe you upgraded your display from a 1080p to a 3440 by 1440 widescreen, and now you need a GPU for that. There's such a difficult question because it's based on so much different stuff. In terms of need, wait until you feel like your system's not doing what you want it to do anymore, whether it be gaming or transcoding, whatever. But if you look at the reviews we post on PCPer.com and on this YouTube channel, you'll get some indication of what performance you're missing out on if you have an older processor, or you're missing out on if you have an older GPU. And that's kind of another way to look at it is, okay, I understand that my system still runs correctly and I can play the game, but maybe it turns out I can do this 50% or 75% better now because it's been 5 years since I last built a machine. And that seems like a pretty common way to look at things. Another question comes in from Mr. Stoolboy. Some of these guys. No real reviewers touch on what I want to know. NVIDIA's Multicore Optimization and NVCP for old and new games. What negatives are found in new and old games alike? And to be honest with you, this is part of the benefit of the questions. I could have just ignored this, but I'm not going to, because the answer is I don't know. The Multicore Optimization that NVIDIA integrated into their control panel, I haven't spent enough time with to really tell you what it does definitively or how it affects the performance of games. The intent of the feature was to, if you had higher core count processors, to allow the driver to enter into a state where it can be more efficient. Now, I don't know what core counts that requires. I don't know how much of a peak difference or what APIs that affects. Is it a universal thing across all games for those APIs or specific games only? We're in a pretty interesting transition point for CPUs, right? We went from basically Intel processors maxing out at quad-core, hyper-threaded for several generations, and AMD came in with Ryzen, released the 8-core 16-thread. It had, gaming complications at the beginning, but the net out of this is that game developers recognize that more CPUs are going to have more higher core counts, thread counts going forward. Skylake X is higher core count, thread count. We see other Intel parts that are apparently coming out that way. Threadripper due out this week. 16 cores, 32 threads. So game developers are going to start to make some of those optimizations themselves. My guess is this NVIDIA feature is more of a late minute addition to try to make up some of that ground. Daniel Stockwell asks, with the rumor / speculation that Intel will be going 6-core for the 8th gen LGA 1151 socket, how do you think this will fit in with the market? Will it scale well on dual channel RAM? And will it be good for gamers and good for performance per dollar? So a good follow-up to the question above. So if the rumors of the 8th generation Intel Core processors for the 1151 socket turn out to be true, that they're going to have a 6-core version, still with 2 channels of memory, it's a really interesting move, and it kind of, again, it shows the benefit of AMD coming into the space and making changes. I don't know if Coffee Lake was going to have 6 cores to begin with, or this was something that came in later because of Ryzen. But I think it should be a beneficial thing for the entirety of the market, whether or not you buy that part or you buy the AMD parts. 6 cores, 12 threads is going to be better. It will depend on what the clock speeds are, what the TDPs are. I think these same rumors he's talking about are mentioning it as being a 95-watt TDP, so the same as the 4790K was type of thing. Will it have integrated graphics? Will it won't? Another interesting question. The rumors again that we saw today were that maybe the Core i3 processors going forward are going to be 4-core 8-thread, and that would be a pretty big move for Intel to make, especially considering we just saw the release of Ryzen 3, and that would really go into Ryzen 5 as well. It may cause another shift in the pricing of the mainstream CPU market, which is all good. Will it scale well on dual channel RAM? I don't know. I assume so. Memory bandwidth is on the Intel parts. On the mainstream Intel parts, doesn't really have a dramatic effect on gaming, has a little bit of effect on some other workloads, but the memory frequency and memory bandwidth of Ryzen and its impact on performance was an outlier over the rest of the market for the last 7+ years or so. So I don't know. I think that probably it'll scale fine. Maybe they'll up the frequency to 3,000, 3 gigahertz or something like that. I don't really know. And all in terms of performance per dollar, it all depends on what Intel decides to sell the part for. If they're super aggressive and they price it the same as their 7700K, then a 6-core part that happens to run at same or better frequencies would be a fantastic deal, because we know the IPC on Intel's parts is better than what you get on Ryzen. So worth noting. Maybe time for 1 or 2 more. John STF72 asked, do you think we'll see NVIDIA Volta GPUs by the end of 2017, or is NVIDIA in no rush or pressure from AMD to release them until 2018? Can we expect major improvements in performance or mainly energy efficiency again? All good questions. I would be surprised if NVIDIA released Volta before the end of 2017. Even with Vega 64 and Vega 56 announced, and we'll have reviews of those up sometime next week. The truth is NVIDIA will still have the performance crown, right? The GTX 1080 Ti is still going to be the performance leader. AMD is pitting the Vega 64 against the GTX 1080 and the Vega 56 against the GTX 1070. So it's definitely going to be the high end, the super high end of the market will still belong to NVIDIA. Now, they also have the ability to maybe update some specs, right? They released the GTX 1080 with 11 gigabit per second memory. I don't even know if I even actually benchmark what the differences were there, but you'd see slight performance improvements. They could do pricing adjustments, but again, I don't think so. I think NVIDIA is very confident and comfortable with its position in the market, its position with its products, and it would take very good reviews of the Vega products and very excited consumer base about Vega, not just AMD fans, but like the general gaming audience to really shift in NVIDIA's stance in any of this regard. So I don't expect anything by the end of 2017. Maybe it's right at the edge of 2018 and they announce Volta consumer GPUs at CES in 2018 or something like that. But even that seems like maybe a stretch. It's hard to predict that far. That's 5 months away. I'm sure they've got stuff ready. That's the thing that's interesting, right? I'm sure if they needed to move things up, they could do it. And that's worrisome if you're AMD, but we'll see what happens. In terms of performance and improvements in performance or mainly energy efficiency, I honestly don't know the answer to that. Process technology, architecturally, I don't know. Volta is using HBM, but if it's coming out in January 2018, my guess is consumer parts will not be using HBM2 still from NVIDIA. My guess is that they'll still be using GDDR5X or GDDR6, but we'll see. I don't have any guesses on performance this time around. So let's do one more for this week, and then we'll save. We'll do two more. Paul Bannon asks, do you believe we are going to see more merging of workstation and gaming monitors? High color accuracy, HDR with high refresh rates, and G-Sync. I don't know. The high color accuracy and the HDR implementations, I think we'll see across both spectrums, the kind of workstation and the gaming markets, and eventually into just the mainstream consumer markets. The high refresh rates are interesting in that I don't see a lot of demand for them in the high-end workstation market, right? They're usually not dealing with things in that type of expediency that they're really worried about. Most of the times, if you're talking about high-end workstations, they're usually, maybe if they're rendering at 10 or 15 frames per second or single-digit frames per second, that's pretty normal. So having 120 hertz refresh rate versus 60 hertz doesn't really change much. Now, if you're a game developer, and that's your profession, that's a different story. I could see you wanting the super high refresh rates and variable refresh rate technologies as well. But I would still see there be a divergence, and even as color quality and HDR capabilities comes to gaming monitors, there's still going to be higher standards that the professional markets will need to address, right? So you can only color correct to as good as the best enterprise professional displays can do. So, my guess is they'll stay ahead a little bit, but they'll also stay ahead in cost as well. So you don't have to worry about that. Let's do one more. Trans Herring asks, what's the connection between PCPer and This Week in Computer Hardware? I see PCPer staff on there with Patrick quite often. Longtime friends, question mark? So actually I just finished recording This Week in Computer Hardware right before I did this recording. So the story is, originally I did a show, how did this work? On Leo Laporte's Twit Network, I did a show with Leo called PC Perspective. And it was essentially This Week in Computer Hardware, he and I talking about the news and the reviews that had come out that week. And then we wanted to move our podcast, the PC Perspective podcast, into video, and the easiest way was to use their resources and say, "Hey, can we all Skype into your system, have an engineer run it, and we just basically record the same show." So then the issue was we were going to have the PC Perspective podcast and the PC Perspective show on the same network on back-to-back days. So we decided to change the name to This Week in Computer Hardware. That's the show that, Twit owns that show. I don't own it. I just host it. I've been doing it since the first episode. But we've had other, co-hosts. It was Leo, and then it was Colleen, and then we moved into Patrick. And I had known Patrick a little bit from, I had been on Tech TV a couple of times, seen him and met him when I was, hanging out at the studios or at CES or something like that. So we know each other. But he was a perfect guy to come in and fill in that spot, who had a good technical knowledge of PCs, built PCs, had a lot of other, experience in this area. So the only reason, and so the relationship between PC Perspective and Twitch is really, honestly, it's just me, right? I am the official co-host of This Week in Computer Hardware, and then, run PC Perspective here. While you see other people like Josh and Alan and Sebastian on there every once in a while, is when I'm out of town. If I can't record the show at the Thursday 3:30 PT or 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time block, I'll have Alan or Josh or Sebastian fill in for me as necessary, and the same thing, or fill in for Patrick when he's not there, right? So if Patrick can't make it and he can't get somebody like Robert Heron to fill in, then we'll find Alan or Sebastian or somebody as well to do it that way. So it's really, there's no direct relationship between them other than everybody knows everybody, and so it just kind of makes sense to do it that way. So all right, that's pretty good. I think we're going to call it for this week. I have some other questions here that we'll be sure to get to as we go. If you have questions based on all the new stuff that's come out, we'll have Vega, we'll have Threadripper, I don't know, other things will surely be coming. Leave a question in the notes here, or you can, if you're watching this on PCPer.com, you can leave a comment on the post as well. And we'll look through those questions there, and we'll answer some for next week. So thanks, everybody. See ya.